So how do you help kids who are navigating tragedy and crisis? Like, what do you say? What do you do? What do you not do? If you're watching this video live, then you know the last 24 hours have been bad in this country. And so this is a very timely video. If you're watching it on the upload, you're probably navigating your own set of bad things. And so all this and more today on our live stream. Thanks for tuning in.
Well, that's how I grew this very good mustache.
So if you're new to the channel, I'm Dr. Noble, developmental behavioral pediatrician, clinical geneticist, and these topics are very important. Here is our agenda for today. I'm going to talk to you today about where I want you to start. Where I want you to start in regards to the conversation with your kids about crisis and tragedy and violence and loss and death and all of the things. Where do you start? How do you start that conversation? I want to talk to you about what to avoid. Because listen, friends, there's things that you do and there's things that you don't do. Okay. And we're going to talk about it. I want to talk to you about young children. How do you approach this topic with young children? How do you approach this topic with school age children? What are some coping problems that kids can have? How do you identify those and what do you do about them? And then lastly, I want to close with more information, because everything that we're presenting today is certainly in response to a number of tragedies that we're facing and navigating as a country. But know that I'm not here to be novel. I didn't invent these strategies, and I will tell you who did at the end. Let's get started. So let's start with it, where I want you to begin. And again, if you're just tuning in, this is where I want you to start as it relates to navigating issues of crisis and tragedy with kids. The first thing I want you to do is I want you to ask some questions. Okay. And some of you might hear this and say, well, but I don't know. I don't want to bring it up, or I feel like they already know, or they've heard a lot of different things. But I want you to start with questions, because I need you. I want for myself, and I want you to get a sense for what your child has heard. Okay. Because as much as we want to be the pinnacle, the primary source of information for our children, none of us watching this are naive enough to believe that that's truly the case. If they interact and rub elbows with anyone outside of your home, then the likelihood they're going to come in contact very quickly with information that you would like to have kept from them is very high. So we need to start our conversation by understanding, what is it that you have heard? Give them time to tell you, because it will help you understand what your on-ramps here are going to be and what moves you need to potentially make in order to correct some maybe false assumptions or misunderstandings. The second question is to ask them specifically, what questions do you have? Okay. And this is important for a number of reasons, right? Children, irregardless of their age or skill set, are going to have questions. The questions is by definition one of the many ways that typify children. They ask the question, what? What do they ask? Why? That's the question that children ask. And these situations, the last 24 hours are no different. What have you heard? Okay. What questions do you have about what you've heard? Again, we're trying to get the right information so we know where to jump in. And then lastly, how do you feel about what's happened? We start our time today with stuff you've thought of. I know this is not news to you, but again, we have to start at the shallow end of the pool by getting the right information and asking it of our children in a way that's sensitive and acknowledges the fact that they have feelings about this. They most definitely feel certain ways about this. And it's important for us to understand what those feelings are, so that, again, we can figure out how to successfully navigate them. This point is very important. Keep your discussion about the issues at hand, the tragedies, the struggles, the natural disasters, whatever it is that brings you to this video. Keep your discussion clear and direct. Clear and direct. This is not a time, okay, for a bunch of metaphors. It's not a time to use flowery language and similes to try and soften the blow in some way. This is a time for you to step right into it. But it's a clear and direct conversation. Very clear, very direct. And some folks will listen to this and say, well, that doesn't, I mean, they're children. They're children. I mean, I don't know, but like, listen, it's a hard truth that, children, while they're not where we are in terms of our ability to comprehend and pull in all the different pieces of information in order to synthesize a conclusion about what we're facing, children are able to do more of that than you think. And in order for them to do it correctly or in a way that's going to be beneficial for their soul, we have to give them clear and direct discussion. Next stop on the journey, here's what I want you to avoid. Okay? Here's what I want you to avoid. Because again, it's important to start a conversation. It's important to talk to your children about these things. It's important to start a dialogue, but there are things that we must avoid at all costs. And it's so important where we're at right now. Again, if you're watching this live, you know what I'm talking about. There were multiple shootings yesterday. Kids from all over the country are seeing and learning and receiving graphic details about this. And there's many reasons for that. But as we seek to dictate the discussion within our home and with our children, it's very important that we, having now understood what they understand, do our very best to avoid graphic details. Okay, we want to avoid graphic details. Now, your children may want to know. They may have some very specific questions. And remember, when you're navigating those questions, you want to do your best to avoid senseless, pointless graphic details or images, right? They're not helpful. Now, they're seeking to understand, right? And again, many of you watching this are seeking to understand, right? And maybe there is no understanding to this. But that's what your children are endeavoring to do. They're endeavoring to come to some kind of understanding about this, some kind of way that they can put it into buckets in their mind. And graphic details and graphic images do not expedite us to that end. Okay, it's nuance that's not necessary to get the point across. Now, unfortunately, you have to be aware that they may have already seen the very worst. Again, in lieu of what we're navigating as a country currently, many of you watching this know that your children were likely shown images of a graphic nature right away at school on their phones. I'm not blaming schools, not blaming anybody. Again, they're seeking to understand and they have access to these devices. And they learned things and saw things that didn't necessarily help them come to a clear, I think, way forward. It was just graphic in nature and troubling. And, I've got kids that are struggling with that even, and will continue to struggle with that. But we have to be aware that even though we're trying to start this in the right way, it's very likely they've already seen things you wish they never would have seen. And it's not that there's an action step there. We just have to acknowledge that. We have to acknowledge that because we may need to address it as you continue to discuss these things in your home. So what do you do with young children? Okay, because again, you would think that this kind of a discussion would be just for kids of certain cognitive age or chronologic ages, but it's not. It's not. Because we live in a moment where kids of all different ages and stages can get access to information. And we have to be able to speak to that. So how do we do it with young children? How do we deal with young children? Well, there's two things I want you to understand. Young children, when they are navigating crisis and chaos and tragedy, they have many, many responses, but two of the most common responses they're going to have are right here. They're going to have an increase in uncertainty and a decrease in skills. Okay, now listen. An increase in uncertainty, which makes sense, right? So if I go to school, am I in danger? If I go to an outside venue to listen to a speaker, am I in danger? Right? They're uncertain, as are we. Okay, but the second thing you have to understand is that some kids have while they have an increase in uncertainty, which makes sense to us, they also have a decrease to some extent in their skills. You can say this a number of different ways, but developmental regression is one way. So think about a situation where a child who maybe was previously wet or dry overnight, or was skilled at picking out their clothes, or skilled at brushing their teeth, or skilled at buckling their own seatbelt. I mean, you pick your skill. Don't be surprised if you've got children who are navigating tragedy and crisis. If if in those seasons they lose some of those skills temporarily. Okay, so think about a developmental regression. And I bring this up because, there's a feeling of overwhelm. They're running too many programs now. I have an old MacBook computer, and if I try and run too many programs, it just shuts off. There's only so many things it can do. I can't check my email. Kids don't have a lot of RAM, okay? And if they got too many programs running with new inputs and new information, don't be surprised if they start to have to shut some programs down for a while. So I only share this because it helps us understand that while we're frustrated, while we're tense, while we're confused and angry and sad, that we got to watch ourselves. Don't take that out on your kids, because this is their way of dealing with the same information as they understand it. And it can be a developmental regression. It doesn't mean that there's a neurodevelopmental issue at stake. It doesn't mean they're going to continue to lose skills, but it means you need to anticipate that, because it's something that could stick around for a while. And if you understand it in the right light, I think you'll have the patience you need to help. So what do we need to do with young children? What do we need to do with them? Well, okay, understand, as I've said, as much as we want to shelter them from this, they still hear about it. And it's better, astronomically better, even when they're young, if you know that there's likely going to be a level of exposure, which, again, you're good parents, you're good caregivers, you know better than me about what your kids can and can't hear and will and won't, aren't exposed to. But it's always better, in my professional opinion, that if there's hard things that are coming, hard news, difficult concepts, it's better if you, as a loved one and a trusted person in their life, tell them first. Okay, it's called the principle of first mention. And it applies to a number of different things outside the context of this video. But it's better if they hear about it from you first. You might say, well, I'm going to let the counselors at school deal with that, or I'm going to let the pastor deal with that, or I'm going to let my sister deal with that. And I have no doubt those people are incredibly skilled at dealing with this. But listen to me. If you've got a kid who's trying to figure out how to live through and navigate crisis and senseless tragedy in their lives, if they see you as a trusted confidant, which of course they do, you got to tell them first. You got to break the ice. You got to be the first one through the glass, regardless of how skilled you feel about doing that, because it's better if they hear it from you first. You have to understand that they still need accurate information. And again, what kind of information is going to be best suited for your child, because you know them better than anybody else. And then it's very important, as you begin a dialogue with young kids, to remind them, hey, look, it's okay if this bothers you. No one's asking you to feel a certain way. Okay. You feel whatever you feel, but if this is not okay with you, if you're not settled, if you don't have this all buttoned up, that's okay. It's okay to not be okay for a long time, and I think that goes for adults as well. So what do we say to school-age children? So kindergarten up through teens and preteens. How do we handle that discussion? Well, that's a little bit more nuanced, and we're going to talk about that now. So in the school-aged child, here's how I want you to think about it. Okay, I'll make it big. In the school-aged child, the preteen, I guess we just talked about school-age kids, preschool kids. In the preteens, I want you to think about it like this. Their primary concerns are going to be safety, which makes sense, right? Safety. Am I safe to go to school? Am I safe to go outside? Not unlike the kids the group that we just talked about, but there's some nuances here. The preteen may also feel a sense of guilt and shame, depending upon how close this tragedy is to them. So if they live in a community where there's a school shooting, if they attended the school, right? If they live in the community where there's been tragedy and they survived it, right? Or maybe they were, from a physical standpoint, unscathed, they're going to feel some guilt and shame. And it's important that you understand that. And this can vary, right? I mean, they may not even be in the direct vicinity of a tragedy, but just understand that the possibility for empathy and is great in this age group. If you're raising them, you might not believe what I just said, but it's true. Oftentimes preteens can be preoccupied with their own actions. So not only the actions of what they need to do and what their values are, right? So maybe this thing has happened and they're still wanting to go to the mall, or they're still wanting to get a pair of shoes. They're still wanting to make sure they can get whatever happens next for their life. Like, that's just them trying to continue to run an operating system that brings peace and predictability and safety. So sometimes we'll see that, and then as adult, when we might be thinking differently or more globally about this. We're mourning, and we're thinking, how can you think about soccer at this time? And again, preteens, they're not necessarily, this is their way of coping in one of many ways. And sometimes don't be surprised if the topic of what's happened comes up, because there's a retelling that occurs. A retelling, and it may be a retelling of what they would have done if they were there, or if they were in this situation, or how they would have responded. A retelling of the events, a retelling of what the chronology of this. These are things that would be pretty common responses in a preteen. Okay, and again, it's not like these is going to change their ability to navigate this, or our ability to navigate this, but understanding this is helpful. Let's talk about teenagers. Teenagers, again, a little more sophisticated. So they're going to have a lot of self-consciousness, okay, which goes with being a teenager. We know that, right? But it's fueled by this idea that, again, like, the world does not fall in neat categories like I kind of thought it would. The example, like, I work hard and I get into the college I want. I study really hard and I become a whatever, right? There's these beliefs that I think kids, young people have, teenagers have. And when you're faced with a tragedy, they become increasingly self-conscious, because they're coming to grips with the fact that this may not actually be entirely true in the way that they had thought or hoped. There's an increase in fear and vulnerability, right? I mean, teenagers in general, I myself as an adult, don't love feeling vulnerable, don't love feeling like there's times and situations when they can't necessarily talk themselves out of a situation, that there are things that could occur outside of their control that could lead to a very poor outcome, a very sad outcome. So they have an increase in fear and vulnerability, right? And they may process that in ways that doesn't look anything like that. Of course, that. They might be prideful and arrogant and make statements like, well, if I was this, I wouldn't have done that, or I never would have been in this place. I mean, honestly, that's how a lot of humans navigate these types of situations. They sidestep it by filling in the gaps with how they would have done something different or never would have been in that situation. And again, that's just us trying to come to some kind of terms about where to put bad things in our lives. I'm not saying it's healthy. I'm not saying it's right, but it's what people do. Sometimes teenagers come up with this idea of revenge and retribution, right? You think about people going to join the military now, they're going to join the special forces, or they're going to, get a permit to do so, whatever it is. And I'm not critical of those things, but understand that those would be pretty typical responses, right? There's revenge and retribution fantasies, like when justice is served, and how this was going to be, and how the world will be put to right, or whatever it is. And then lastly, and maybe most importantly, if you're raising teenagers, it's important that you understand that there's a very real possibility that they could begin to have a real shift in how they see the world. And maybe there's a part of that it can be protective and useful in the future. But, that blissful naivete that everything's okay and everything's going to be okay. And while I do believe that, we will persevere and we will stick together and we'll find a way forward, teenagers maybe have a little different relationship with those statements. And there's almost a death of naivete, but in its place sometimes comes things that we have to watch out for, right? Because they have a shift in outlook. Sometimes they have some coping strategies like substance abuse or promiscuity, or just poor choices. They're quitting things. They're starting things they didn't ever do. They quit things they always used to do that were good. These are things that you got to watch for in kids, but don't be surprised if they walk through a significant shift in their outlook as it relates to the world. So what do we do? What do we do? Look, I'm trying to make this practical and timely. Here's what I want you to think about. If you don't have the words to start a conversation with your preteen or teens, I've got a bunch of these in my house, and this is kind of some scripting that we've used that I've borrowed from sources I'll cite at the end, but let me break it big. The first thing is timeline. Okay. And here's what I mean by timeline. Yesterday, this happened. Yesterday is the timeline. The location. Yesterday in Denver, Colorado. Yesterday in Utah. And then you talk about the crisis. This happened. Yesterday, in this specific place, this happened, right? There was a whatever, and a crisis occurred. Matter of fact, clear, direct, right? The importance of timeline is because they need to know this is not an ongoing conflict, or if it is, you need to specify. Location, meaning it's here. It's not here with us, it's there. And if it's here with us, well, then again, we have to specify a lot of different factors. We have to acknowledge the nuances of those things. You have to be very specific about the crisis. What exactly happened? What exactly occurred? And what was the outcome? Did somebody survive? Were there survivors? Were there no survivors? Like what happened? Okay. Give them clear and direct information about this. And then lastly, you end this script with the response. What is the response? And not necessarily your response or our community's response, but police are working to resolve this, to find, and not that there's resolution, but to apprehend individuals who are guilty, and to ensure both locally and on the national level that instances like this don't recur. And so I think it's important for them to understand also in the response is that people are working on this. Okay, people are working night and day on this. People are praying about this. People are looking for clues. People are doing everything in their power to ensure that justice is served. Okay, let's close our time by talking about coping problems. Like, what do you do? What happens when I tell you all these things, we give you the script and you do this YouTube thing and everything, but you're like, I haven't learned anything. Okay, let's talk about what you do when coping problems come up. But first, let's talk about what do I mean by coping problems? Well, when kids don't walk through something in a manner that if they're navigating a situation and it doesn't look like they're going to be very successful, and you're starting to see some red lights on the dashboard of life, this is what those red lights look like. First is sleep problems. And again, if I had one question to ask an adolescent, if you gave me 30 seconds in a room with an adolescent, you said, no, well, I don't know if he's depressed or he has anxiety, or if he's doing drugs, or I don't know what's going on. What you got 30 seconds. What would you ask him? I would ask him this one question. How do you sleep? How do you sleep? You could ask other questions. There's probably better ones, like, what are you looking forward to? That's another great question. But sleep is a big one because it's the endophenotype of so many different things, right? Are you able to settle your mind? How's your level of anxiety? What's your sleep hygiene like? Are you rested? What's your mental health the next day when you're only sleeping 4 hours a day? Sleep. If kids who are not coping well are not generally sleeping well. Physical complaints. Kids don't want to go to school. They don't want to go to church. They don't want to do the thing. They've got abdominal pain. They've got a headache. They've got a knee pain. They've got a thing, right? Remember, there's going to be oftentimes, depending on the age of the kid, there could be some regression in skill sets, right? So they're going to find ways, either intentionally or unintentionally, to draw attention to something in their life, whether their inability to buckle a seatbelt or their inability to go to practice because of abdominal pain. But just remember, these things look different, but I think the warning signs are both the same, and the treatment is see me, see this. This is a problem. I'm struggling. I'm not doing well. Changes in behavior, right? I just talked about developmental changes, but there's just also changes in behavior. Kids that were typically mild-mannered and made good progress and transitioned well and got out of the car and went to school, all of a sudden are not. So again, put that in the right light and understand it for what it is. And then lastly, emotional problems, outbursts, transition difficulties, anxiety, irritability, these kinds of things. These are things that you can expect to see, but how do you help these kids? Well, the first thing you got to do, and again, I don't know who's watching this. I don't know who will watch this. So we got to start at the beginning. Listen, you got to make time. It's not a secret that if you're raising kids in our cultural moment, the likelihood that you are running too fast, eating too many takeout meals, driving to too many games, spending too much money, going on fewer and fewer vacations, while you're sitting at a Holiday Inn pool for the 50th soccer tournament of the year. Like, the likelihood that you are overwhelmed is high. And these situations come up, they take time. This isn't a conversation in the drive-through lane at Chick-fil-A. This is an ongoing discussion that you may have to stop your life. You may have to not go to a few tournaments. You may have to sit it out and make some space so that your kid knows that you're serious about this. This isn't just like, let me give you the bullet points so that we can get on with our life. Sometimes that's not the option for us here. Promote safety. Help them understand that we are taking steps. Your school is taking steps. Our community is taking steps to ensure that you are safe when you go places. Maintain rules. Just because your kid's struggling doesn't mean that the rules and the schedules have to completely change, right? I mean, aside from maybe some things that are breaking your family, like run into 1,000 soccer matches, but you still have to maintain rules because it gives children a sense of safety. Limit media exposure. Don't do it. If you're looking for a time to get a better handle on what your kids are exposed to, this is the time. They do not need to see videos of all the terrible things that we've been walking through over the last 24 hours on their phone at school in between chorus and PE. They do not need to see that, right? And I know that's hard. I get it. You can't control what other kids have on their phones, but do your best to control what your kid can see. Manage reminders. There's going to be things that come up, right? They're going to hear the pop of a balloon and they're going to think someone is shooting. Someone's going to drop books and they're going to think that someone's throwing things and we all have to hide under our desk. You have to manage those things, often with the help of a professional, right? You have to help them understand that I heard this. It reminded me of this instance. That's not what's happening. I am safe, right? We have to figure out a way to work that script into their lives. And of course, a professional is going to be best suited to help you walk through that as a family. Here's some comments. I guess I'm sorry, Dennis, I didn't look to see. Following a catastrophe, why do some kids develop post-traumatic stress while others develop post-traumatic growth? Oh, that's a great question, Dennis. And I'm not exactly sure. I think that I would zoom out, probably click out 1 on the microscope. We're at 100x here. I'd probably click out the 10x. I don't know why some kids go one way and some kids go another, but post-traumatic stress is a good way to say it. And I think that all the things that we've discussed up to this point are pretty consistent with that thought process. So that's a great question. And Dennis goes on to say, here in Spain, mass shootings are rare. Oh, thank God for that, my man. Thank God for that. Thanks for your comments, Dennis. Okay, so let me give you a little more information about where you can go for more reading. The American Academy of Pediatrics, Dr. David Schoenfeld, is a developmental behavioral pediatrician who's done a ton of work on this. A lot of what I've said today comes from his work. And there's also the National Child Traumatic Stress Network, which has been awesome as well. I would check out their website. I'll put the links in the description below. Thank you for your time. You have our prayers, all those you who are hurting. And I promise you that if we stick together, we can get through this. So thanks for watching.